Hello and welcome to the shop. For a while now I've had it in the back of my mind to make a checkerboard blank, for lack of a better term, and I've got a piece of maple and a piece of walnut here, and what I want to do is cut them into segments, and I want to create a checkered blank. So let me show you the process that I'm going to use to do that. I'm going to start by drilling a 1/4 inch hole as far into this blank as I can. My bit is not long enough to go all the way through the blank, but that's not a problem. As we cut our segments off and we reach the point where the bit stopped, we'll bring it back over to the drill press and go ahead and finish out through the remaining part of the blank. The reason I'm drilling a 1/4 inch hole is because when I get my pieces segmented off, I need to reassemble them, and I'm going to use a bolt with a couple of fender washers and a nut as a clamp to do that. This bolt is 1/4 inch in diameter. That's as far as we can get with this particular bit. I've set up a little sled that I made from a bandsaw with a stop block that allows me to cut 1/8 inch segments off of each of my blanks. What I want to do is the end that I drilled into, I want to put that toward the stop block. Now I'm going to go ahead and just clean the front edge up, so I'm going to back this up a little bit. It's not going to be against the stop block for the first cut. And then once we get it cleaned up, we'll push it against a stop block and continue to cut segments all the way down the blank. Just a quick note, I said I was going to cut 1/8 inch segments. I actually have this set for 1/4 inch segments. So let's go ahead and continue cutting. Slide it right up against the stop block. With the sections cut, I now want to go ahead and dry fit them onto the bolt. And the reason for dry fitting them is I just want to look for any possibilities of gaps between the pieces so that I don't have an issue in the final piece. Now what I want to do is square the blank up. And now I want to look for any imperfections in the blank, something like this right here. What happened is my maple blank was not perfectly square, so as I ran the bit down through the blank, it sort of went off center a little bit. We're going to remove that piece and replace it. And I'm just going to basically go through the blank. I'm going to replace something like this. Try to get it as square as possible. I'll come back and show you what it looks like once I get done cleaning it up. Here's the final blank with all of my adjustments. One thing that I ended up doing, I noticed that the walnut was lighter on one side than it was on the other, so I made sure all of the walnut pieces are turned the same direction. What I'm going to do now is pull this apart, keeping everything in order exactly the way it is, and then we're going to get our glue, and we're going to go ahead and glue this up with a little tight bond too. My blank has been drying for right at 20 minutes, and I want to go ahead and get the bolt removed because the threads of the bolt will fill up with the Titebond glue, and it will actually glue it inside of the blank and make it virtually impossible to remove without breaking the blank. I'm just going to extend the vise wide enough so that the bolt can drop through, and then we're going to attempt to drive it out of the blank. And I tell you what, that's not working. Let me get a standard hammer. And before we do this, let's put the nut back on so we can pound on the top of that and not damage our threads. There we go. Okay, have another idea. Much easier. Now we're just going to set this aside and let it dry thoroughly, and we'll come back and clean it up and finish the blank. I need to square up all four sides of this blank, so I went ahead and ran it back through the drill press, drilling a 7mm hole up the middle. I then inserted a 10-inch long 7mm tube, and I measured from the zero clearance edge of my small stock joining jig at both ends of the tube to make sure they were exactly the same distance from the end of the jig. And now what I'm going to do is run through the blade, clean this side up, and then we'll flip it over and get the other three sides. After I got the blank squared up, I went ahead and found the center, and you can tell I put a dot on this side. I'm going to split this blank in half, and then on this side and this side, I'll split them individually so that we'll have four separate pieces of this blank that we can then glue back together to form a single blank. With the pieces split apart, what we now want to do is flip them inside out and glue them back together. As I glue these back together, I forgot to mention a second ago, what I want to do is flip them so that the colors alternate. Just making sure all of the little squares line up. And now we're going to put a little bit of glue on the back of this, and we'll glue them together, and then we'll clamp everything up. And once again, we want to make sure that walnut and maple alternate. Okay, let me grab a couple of clamps and we'll clamp this up. As I was gluing the blanks up, you can see where they separated. I'm not overly concerned about that. I'm going to let this glue tack, and then I should be able to put those two pieces back together. The biggest issue was you saw when I was running them through the bandsaw that a little piece broke off of one end. There were actually two pieces, and as I flipped them, they ended up being opposite one another, so they just let loose. Not a big issue. Everything else looks great. We'll glue those back together in a few minutes when the glue has set. My checkerboard blank is glued up. It's ready for me to go ahead and cut it and get the tubes inserted. One thing I want to say about this, I don't have a lot to work with because I started off with a 3/4 inch blank, and drilling the 1/4 inch hole took quite a bit of meat away from the outside. In the future, I would recommend starting with about a 1 inch thick blank, and I think that will give you a much nicer blank to deal with. I really feel like if I split this for the two tubes, that I should be able to hit the center. So I think this is going to work just fine. I'm getting ready to do that. I'm not going to film the turning part. This was more about making the blank. So I'm going to go ahead, shut the camera off. We're going to turn this blank. If there are any issues, I'll come back and talk to you about those. But I am hoping that I'll be back in a moment and I will show you a finished blank. I've got my checkerboard blank ready to go to the lathe. I've gone ahead and drilled it and glued a tube in there. Well, I say it's ready to go to the lathe. I need to sand it down to the level of the tube real quick, but that won't take but a moment. I do have one small issue. On this end of the blank, I drifted. And I think it's because when I locked this into my vise, I didn't have it straight up and down because I was able to drill the larger one with no trouble at all. It went straight through. I think I still have enough meat there to finish that. It is going to be way off at the end of the blank. I'm a little upset about that, but you know, at this point in the game, I'm going to go ahead and turn it because I hate to have to go back and remake it. So let's just see how well it turns. I'm actually not going to film the turning process because this video is really more about building of the blank. So we're going to shut the camera off, and when I come back, I'll show you the finish pin, and we'll see if this blank build was a success. I've got my blank turned and it's ready to be finished. And do you notice anything funny about it? Right here. What I had, as you might remember, my blank fell apart whenever I was clamping it up because the clamps are a bit heavy. So instead of gluing those two ends together because they didn't line up quite right, I glued the opposite ends of the blank. I squared them and glued them together. The glue joint looks really nice. The problem is I did not rotate them so that they would alternate colors. So now my checkerboard pin has a big rectangle in the center of it. Oh well, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to go ahead and sand this pin down, finish it, get it into a kit. I think overall the blank is a success. I think you've just got to be smarter than me when you build your blank and make sure that you keep an eye out to alternate your different colors of wood. Overall, I'm very happy with the blank. I think it turned out beautiful. I think I proved the concept that we can make a checkerboard blank this way. The only suggestion I would have for you is I started with two roughly 3/4 by 3/4 inch blanks. I'd recommend starting with something in the neighborhood of about 1 inch by 1 inch. I think that'll give you a little more meat. I had some difficulty drilling the blanks because they were so thin. And you can see, remember I was a little bit off at one end, but it actually turned out not too bad. It actually lines up pretty good. This is the end that was off right here. So overall, I'm happy with the blank. Thanks for following along, guys. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon. Take care, everybody.